interesting morning so far, and it's proving to be exciting. I think Jonathan Jansen shook things up big time, and Hasina has contributed to that. And I know you well enough to know that you will probably shake us up a little more. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Eric to share with us his perspective. Thank you so much. Eric, you're muted at the moment. There we go. Can I just remind our delegates who've just joined us to please make sure they mute their mics so we don't have conflict of interest. I know as you first come in, your mic is on. All right, so please mute it straight away. Thanks, Eric. Over to you.
Julietta, thank you and good morning. My apology for not joining earlier. There's a 2-day summit on ECD led by the Premier in the Western Cape taking place at this very moment, and I've been part of that. What I want to do is, when the request or the suggestion came out about issues and areas that ECE could tackle, I thought that given that we're in 2021, activism, early childhood development activism is so critical, and your timing in having this session is so important. I want to provide a context for asking our academic community to become activists in early childhood development. There's been a lag between academic production in terms of publications and thinking and actual activism, getting out there and taking that wonderful research that we've got and putting it into action. So that was my motivation for suggesting a social action, social justice component to ECE's work. I think since COVID and the national lockdown in March 2020, much has happened in the early childhood development sector. Much of it has been negative, however, and has substantially impacted upon the early childhood workforce and upon children. When the lockdown was announced late in March 2020, businesses, schools, early childhood development centers were instructed to close. And as a country, we understood this, and we understood the imperative of closing and reducing the impact or mitigating the impact of COVID. Then the president moved us from level 5 to level 4 and to level 3. And the National Command Council approved that schools could open and grade R classes attached to the Department of Basic Education could open. What the Department of Social Development did was they would not allow early childhood development centers to open. So we had a ludicrous situation where a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old in a DBE affiliated ECD center could attend, but a 4 or 5-year-old in a social development affiliated ECD center could not return. And this resulted in a organization called the SA Childcare, taking the department to the High Court, and the Center for Early Childhood Development, a non-profit that I lead, was appointed as a friend of the court to provide expert opinion. And to cut a long story short, the High Court ruled that early childhood development centers across both departments could open fully the very next day. And that was the 7th of July. Now, that decision only came about because of activism in the form of litigation and expert evidence. After this, the Social Development Minister cynically removed the Early Childhood Development Subsidy from ECD centers. And she did this maliciously in a manner which gave the sense that she was getting back at the non-profit sector, the ECD non-profit sector. What happened next was that 8 organizations around the country got together and took the minister to court again. And she lost for the second time when the High Court ruled that the minister has to pay those ECD subsidies as in the transfer payment agreement that the department had with all ECD centers. So there was 2 litigations, social activism, which gave early childhood development some prominence and corrected really silly decisions by the Social Development Department. The next big occurrence in the early childhood sector was in October 2020, where the president announced 1.3 billion rand stimulus package for ECD. And this was made up of several components, and a large component was that the minister would employ 36,000 youth to go around the country and to enforce compliance on ECD centers. The effect was this, that the ECD sector came together, and in 2 protests, 2 days of protest, tens of thousands of ECD workers across the country were on the streets. And shortly after that, the minister and the department withdrew that requirement of using stimulus package money to force compliance by using young people, untrained, not knowing what ECD is about, to go and do the department's dirty work. So this has all been really outrageous. But it gets worse. The 1.3 billion rand that the president made available had to be backed up by a coherent early childhood development plan going forward during COVID. To cut the long story short, the Department of Social Development could not get together a coherent plan. And as a result, the National Treasury took back 712 million rand. Took it back because the department could not produce a coherent plan. Now, that message came to me in written form from the highest level of National Treasury. So if we look at what the president allocated, the 1.3 billion, less than half, in fact, it's more like 30-odd%, is eventually going to find its way into the pockets of ECD centers around the country. 496 million was allocated to salary support for around 110,000 ECD workers. But the system set up to access this 496 million was convoluted, it was bureaucratic, and it was highly technical. Mrs. Kumalo in Lusikisiki could not access that money. She didn't have technology, she didn't have electricity, she didn't have data. So large groups of vulnerable ECD workers were excluded. As we sit today, of the 496 million set aside for the stimulus package for salary support, less than 150 million has been spent. That's about 30% And it's almost a year, it's a few days short of a year since President Ramaphosa announced the 1.3 billion package. There are positives that have come out of COVID. The early childhood development sector nationally came together in a show of activism. And when I say we got tens of thousands of people out on the streets, in every corner of the country, people were out on the streets protesting, if not at Department of Social Development offices, then in local communities. And we have not seen this activism in the early childhood sector since the mid-1990s. So that's the backstory. I then made a call to the South African Research Association for Early Childhood Education. Let's make everybody an ECD activists, including academics. The activists are there on the ground, the ECD workforce and the non-profit sector. But we've got this wonderful resource of knowledge, intellect, and capacity sitting in our universities. And I think the time is eminently right for the academic sector to link up with the non-profit and community sector in taking early childhood development forward. So as a sector, we need to raise our voice in ways that have been largely silent for over a decade. Now is the time for us to do something radical about early childhood development in South Africa. As the academic sector, we have a very important role to play. We generate knowledge and we generate information and we generate data, and we can use this to tackle the deficits that we see in early childhood development. Activism is a dynamic process, as we know. It requires much effort, lobbying politicians, lobbying public officials at all three spheres of government, national, provincial, and local. It means being part of ECD protest, being part of litigation, and all those other social development activities which take place. Together with the non-profit sector and the community sector, we have to take our message to politicians and to officials in government. That's where the hard decisions are taken. As they say, where the rubber hits the road. We have to take our academic knowledge and our information to business, to trade unions, to communities, and to parents around the country. And this is an essential part of democracy. We need a mass of activists supporting ECD principals, teachers, governing body members, and that can be supported by the academic world, by writers, and by researchers. There's some wonderful research coming out of South Africa and globally that we can use to advance early childhood development. I think, notwithstanding our government having signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we've also signed the African Charter on the Welfare of the Child, we have a Bill of Rights, which speaks about children's access to education, social services, social security, and we have a national integrated early childhood development policy approved by the cabinet in December 2015. Notwithstanding all of these instruments, early childhood development is still not a priority in South Africa. To give you an indication of this or evidence of this, We have a local government election coming up on the 1st of November. I took the election manifestos of the four biggest political parties, the African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance, the Good Party, and the Economic Freedom Fighters. And I studied their election manifestos. Together, it comes to about 180 odd pages. The words early childhood development, or the acronym ECD, does not appear in the election manifesto of a single one of the big political parties, even though early childhood development is significantly impacted by local government. When one looks at the manifestos of the EFF and of the DA, the word children does not appear. The Good Party mentions that they will provide play parks which are safe for young children. And the African National Congress mentions the same. They will provide parks and space for children, and they would provide some infrastructure. But not one of these major parties in the local election coming up has shown any inclination towards early childhood development. So we can't sit still passively any longer as an academic sector. We have to get started now. And in the 80s, the rallying cry was Sekunjalo. Now is the time. The time has come. I think we have to learn as the academic sector how to participate in political action around ECD. And I'm not talking about party political action. I'm talking about activism in its broadest sense, in the sense of activism is necessary in a democracy. I think in doing so, as a sector, we can bring about significant change. It's going to be adversarial because we will be confronting government with their weaknesses. I'm tired of hearing how much government has done. I want to hear from government what they have not done. So it's all very well saying that we put 200 million rand into early childhood development. Tell me what percentage of your overall expenditure is that 200 million? And invariably across the 9 provinces, it will not even touch 1% of provincial expenditure. So we need to learn, and then we need to act. And it's the learning part that those individuals belonging to the Research Association for Early Childhood Education can play a role. We have to empower ourselves with information that we can take to authorities to get better decisions for children. And the academic community can do this. I asked a few people to give me examples of research that could be done. And I'll run through them. There are about 7 or 8 areas where the academic sector can come together and provide the critical knowledge, information, and data that we need in the early childhood sector. The first is a comparative study of early childhood development policy, structures, and systems around the world to learn from best practice. The second is examining the application of environmental health and municipal bylaws on early childhood development. Those bylaws have a huge impact. Just down the road from where I'm sitting, an impoverished community has to pay 60,000 rand to get land use approval. They have to pay for an architect to draw up floor plans. all of these are mitigating factors, are obstacles to increasing early childhood development access. So a look at the municipal bylaws and how it denies young children the right to early childhood development, which is enshrined in the Constitution. There's a study for somebody to do. Another idea which somebody gave me was to look at the establishment of an ECD specific ministry or unit in the presidency. Another idea I was given was that somebody should be studying the provision of quality ECD as a basic human right and the obligations on government to give effect to this. Because our documents that we've signed are international and national instruments that government has signed. That's where it stops. It stops with a signature on a document and it doesn't get implemented. Further research which could be done is, what is the funding role and system or mechanism that could be put in place by government for early childhood development? At the moment, less than 25% of our early childhood centers get an ECD subsidy. And the way the regulations are, or the policy is now structured, if a family earns more than 7,600 Rand a month, they are considered too wealthy to get the ECD subsidy and they are disqualified. If it's a single parent, that drops to 3,800 Rand a month. So if you earn just over the national minimum wage, you are considered too wealthy to get the ECD subsidy. As an aside, the South African government spends 400 Rand every single day of the year on every single prisoner in the country. To keep a prisoner in Pollsmoor prison, government pays 400 Rand per prisoner per day. The early childhood development subsidy equivalent is 17 Rand per child per day, and it's for 264 days of the year. How they get that number, I've got no idea. And there's a means test. So there's a huge human rights issue there around subsidies. And the final two bits of research that was suggested to me is, what role can government play in providing infrastructure for early childhood development centers? And then lastly, how could a feasible and practical and effective registration and subsidization policy be put in place? To sum up, the late Oliver Tambo, a great patriot and a great South African, said that a country or a nation that neglects its children does not deserve its future. And my question to the academic world is, do we deserve our future if we treat young children the way we do? So let's get together, let's use that intellect, let's use that knowledge, let's use those research opportunities that we have to make an impact on young children's lives across the board in South Africa. Julietta, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate this presentation, and I think you've also given us, in fact, it's 7 potential research questions to already grapple with. I'm opening the floor to the audience. Any comments or questions from the audience for Prof Atmore? Looking to see if we have any hands up at this stage.
Julieta, can I make one point at this moment, because it's critical to the academic world.
Yes.
The early childhood data in South Africa is shockingly weak, inadequate, and outdated. We don't know how many preschool children there are. What is going on at the moment, there's an early childhood development census that's going on for September and October months, funded by the Lego Foundation. Hopefully we will get some data there. I haven't seen the research instrument. I've seen bits of it. I just hope that it's going to be comprehensive and that it's going to provide information for government and the non-profit sector and the academic world to get together. So whatever numbers we hear, particularly out of mouths of politicians, must be treated with huge suspicion. I've heard 2 different politicians, both at cabinet level, say totally opposite things in terms of numbers. And the Lego Foundation, together with the Department of Basic Education, is doing this census. And let's see what comes out of that. We may get some good data on which to plan.
But I think that also raises the question of how an organization like ECE can contribute to gathering rich data, through doing the sort of research that you've just recommended. I see Hasina's hands up. Hasina?
Yes, thank you, Eric, for that very powerful presentation. And I think that what you are, nudging us to do is to look at research as activism. And I don't think that's an area that has been properly developed. So it's carte blanche, and it is very bottom up, I think, and it is being conceptualized by the excellent work you've been doing thus far. And I think that we need to give this life in terms of its, I'm thinking, with my research hat, that we might look at it in terms of what is the concept all about and where did it emanate from, and so its historical backing. And then looking at the methodologies that we have been using and the kinds of substantive issues that we are picking up on. And I think that what is so refreshing about what you are saying is that there's a different kind of an accountability for the researchers, the early childhood researchers. So the example that you gave on the census, for example, when the data comes in, it should be the SARISI committee that would be like looking at it and saying, now, what does this mean? All these numbers and what have you? What are the methodological issues that have thrown up this kind of data? And is it adequate to do planning? So in other words, to take a critical stance, because Jonathan this morning said that it's not the intention of politicians to have certain things on the table unless you get the activism, and that from the fact that you got results when noises started to be made. So I think that even when it comes to the budget analysis, to have a look at where is early childhood squeezed in, is it visible? And what you did with the manifesto is very important, also to look at the visibility of early childhood and why emphasis on perhaps resources, but not early learning outcomes, for example. Why is this chosen over that? Is it a selling point for parties that gets more votes, for example, and these kinds of visible things that you see in a community? I can see a play park, so I put it there, kind of thing. So I think that there are a lot of food for thought, and I hope later we can really engage with putting out blogs, putting out policy briefs, putting out critical pieces just in time, so that the academic community is also. Thank you.
Julieta, can I comment on what Hasina has said?
Yes, please.
Hasina, these 3 words will go down cited as Hasina Ibrahim. And you said research as activism. I love that. I love that. You've got copyright on that, but let's use it. Let's use our research as activism. Thank you for that. You also made a comment about noise and making a noise. The late Kader Asmal, when he was education minister, I had the fortune to meet with him with a couple of other early childhood activists. And he said something very interesting. He said, it's the squeaking wheel that gets the oil. And what he meant was, government will not listen to you unless you make a noise. And he was talking from his heart. It's the squeaking wheel that gets the oil. And I think we must learn from that. And we've seen over the past year that noise has increased substantially. And then lastly, your comment about play parks and political parties claiming it. That happens. The most ludicrous political actions that one sees now at this time, just before an election, is politicians kissing babies, right? There's no better photo opportunity than a politician kissing a baby. It tugs at the heartstrings. When the election is over and the results are announced, those communities do not see that politician for another 5 years, whether it's national or local government elections. And this is what we need to focus on and bring to the attention of South African citizens. So there's a huge task ahead. But if I look at the people on this discussion this morning, I look at Professor Corinne Meyer, who's spoken with me about this many, many months ago. I look at other individuals, and I look at Nazima, who's down the road from me in Mowbray. We've got the capacity, we've got the expertise. We just need to do it in a coordinated fashion that really makes government sit up and put young children first.
Thanks, Eric. We have a question also from Melandre Flock. Melandre?
Yes, good morning. I'm a lecturer in early childhood education at CPUT at Wellington campus. And I was inspired, Eric, by your idea of advocacy. And the thought came to me, where are the young children in terms of advocacy? And are teachers really equipped to enable children to express their views according to the United Nations Rights of the Child, Article 12? And there's I think there's a research gap in that field on how to equip educators on in innovative ways, inspiring children to say what they feel. Loris Malaguzzi said children are strong and powerful and able to say what they feel, how they want to change the world. But are we really giving children an opportunity to do so? There are wonderful creative ways, organizing a children's forum with adults, equipping children around a theme, whether it's changing the world to be safer, or inclusivity, or many ideas that we can look at. So I think there should be more innovation on how to equip young children to share their views in ways that are child-friendly, and research to do in that field. Also in terms of their sexual rights and sexual health. So yeah, that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Melandra, 100% agree with you. There are ways, and children know what they want. I have 3 grandchildren, and they tell me what they want. And it's not just the ice creams and the chips and the sweets. They want to be valued. They want to be respected. They want opportunities. So I think you've got a wonderful idea, and I love doing this, throwing the challenge back to you. Put together a research proposal or study exactly answering your question. I think it would be very powerful. In the Western Cape, we have a commissioner for children. She's been in the post for about a year, and she's done quite a lot of work with children, but the children she works with are slightly older. So the challenge to you is just do it.
That's a great inspiration. Thank you for that. We should see more young children, I think, also in government sharing their voices, like the Regio approach.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, there used to be a children's parliament, and with COVID, we haven't had that. I'm not sure if it was a once-off for the cameras or if it was taken seriously. But we have to pursue it. Children know what they want. They know what they don't want as well. They don't want to be molested. They don't want to be abused. They do not want to fall down pit latrines and drown. They do not want to be electrocuted by overhead cables in their communities. So let's do it.
Thanks, Prof. A thought that occurred to me listening to this engagement between you and Melandre, a lot of us are involved obviously in teacher training, and it is one of our mandates at SARA ECE to improve teacher training. And I think we can all admit that one of the biggest issues we face for our teachers is that shift in attitude of understanding that children actually do have a voice, and that the teacher's role isn't to keep that voice quiet so their classroom isn't chaotic. So I think we do have to acknowledge as trainers of teachers, we must be mindful of putting that attitude at the forefront when we advise teachers on how to interact with learners, etc. Any other comments for Eric today from anybody else on the floor? I'm just going to quickly check our chat in case anybody's typed something. Okay, we do have something here from Kerry Lee. Kerry Lee is saying, I think working with children as research partners is essential in a project on transformation, social justice, and advocacy. However, from an academic and research perspective, ethical clearances and the POPI Act makes providing more limitations than affordances in doing so. And I think this is a very relevant point that Kerry Lee is raising. We sort of almost have the door slammed shut before you even start the research because of the issue she's just raised. But Eric, could you comment?
Yes, Kerry Lee's spot on. You know, it's I sit on the ethics committee at Cape Town University, and it is fraught with challenges. But there are methodological ways of getting around it. You know, we can't use children, but we can get direction, we can get guidance, we can get where we should be going just by watching children and listening to them. So there are creative ways of getting children's voice into our research. And there are some studies on that. But Kerry Lee, again, the challenge is there for you. Make it happen. Lead us on this, because we need to hear those children's voices.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you so much for a very interesting and again challenging presentation this morning. We are going to move to the next presentation on a different link now. It comes up at 11:20. Just a heads up, it is a pre-recorded presentation from Zelda Ardendorf from the DHET. So it's not interactive, but you can certainly post any questions you might have for Zelda in the chat, and then we will make sure those get emailed to her and hopefully answered. Eric, thanks a million. Really appreciate your input, and I hope that all of those of us that are present today have been inspired. Eric has bounced the ball straight back at us. It's in our hands. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julietta. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.